Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Neuro, and this is Philos'o'clock with EcceFatum. It's been many months since we've had an episode, and there are two main reasons for that. One reason is I have moved from Washington State to California. The other reason is EcceFatum is now a father. So he is going to be talking with us about parenthood. And this is meant to be a living, breathing, active conversation. So if you want to weigh in Twitch chat, I'll be paying attention to chat here, not going to play any games. We're just going to focus on the conversation and figure out what all the fuss is about. Why do people love parenthood? Why do some people get stressed out by it? What are the lessons that you learn from raising a child? And also, why do some people choose not to have children? I'm going to phone Dr. Ecce and we will get his word on it.
Hello.
Yo, what is up, Dr. Ecce?
Is it picking up the right microphone?
It sounds a little scuffed, so you might double check it. We do have a starting question in the chat. Does it count as parenthood if you're the parent of a cat or other child?
Was this Sea of Whiskey asking?
No. But that was a good guess. That is the correct microphone. You sound better now.
Perfect. I'd say it's different, but still comparable in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I only have the comparison to a dog, and it is... A lot of things are kind of similar, but then again, a human has a bit more range of interacting with you than a cat does, so I'd say it's quite different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a lot more steps that you have to follow as well, and human children, if I can reference the recent Mindset 101 discussion we did, humans have such advanced, complex brains that take so long to develop that we are effectively helpless and useless for the first couple years once we're born. The brain isn't even done developing, so a human baby, when it's born, is not a fighting unit. It cannot flee battle, it cannot give battle, it can scream and poop. And those are basically its moves starting out. It can crawl around maybe. But yeah, thinking about that is how humans require additional assistance as children to allow their brains to develop fully. Most animals are born and they are a little bit more capable to move around. They're a little bit more ready to deal with the dangers of nature, but not us. Humans are different like that.
Did you consider that pooping might be a valid battle strategy?
It could be a battle strategy, to be honest. Like, if I'm thinking about having a nice meal in front of me and there's like a whole bunch of poop with it, that's less attractive as a meal. So yeah, if they're very stinky, that can be a defense. There was even a line in Baldur's Gate 3, there's a monster hunter guy who meets you, and he's like really stinky because he's hunting monsters, and he said, if you can't mask your scent, then spoil it. So how old is your child now, and maybe kind of walk us through the journey?
He's... Good question. 8 months, some days. 8.5.
Nice. Getting close to a year.
It moves rather quickly, and that might be because you're not seeing much sleep during these first couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of all the time becomes somewhat of a blur. But you realize you're like something's different once you get the first notification that your phone memory is full of kid pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Then you need to start erasing some, and then you get new, like every 3 weeks or so, it's full of pictures again.
Mm-hmm.
They do so many things when they're this young that it's just too amazing not to take pictures of.
Yeah, you don't want to
You're
lose it.
constantly, yeah. Chat started out with the topic quite aggressively, I want to say.
Yes.
We're talking parenthood. Yay, let's do antinatalism. I get it, and I kind of want to get into that subject as well. So let's start the conversation before having kids, before being pregnant, before knowing that you want to have a kid, and how do you decide on do it? Why should you do it? Why you probably shouldn't do it? Like, what are good or bad reasons to have kids? The other argument that was mentioned with whether or not it's selfish to have kids, I think you could argue either way. It's not a clear-cut solution there. It's like most answers in ethics. It's like, yeah, kind of maybe, but also kind of no. Yeah, so there's that. Yeah, so I guess one question that popped up to kind of, for those listening, I have one kid now, and it will likely be our only kid. So my sample size is 1, which apparently is good enough to do psychological studies. So there's that.
Mm-hmm. You have infinitely more experience than me. It is an interesting question chat was kind of pointing to, which is this world good enough that you would choose to spawn another unit into it? And my opinion would be yes. I feel like the Earth has a lot of really beautiful and awesome experience that we can enjoy while we're here. And the world has been getting better over time in terms of our quality of life. We do have new problems now, but to give someone the opportunity to live a life as a human on Earth, for most countries of the world, I would say is a pretty cool opportunity. We were discussing before, people who were about to be born, we didn't, at least not that we remember, we didn't elect to exist in a way of like, hey, I want to spawn into the world, into Earth. That's a decision that the parents make for you. And then you are dealt some genes and some different random events that happen as you develop and are born and so on. And then you get to kind of be imprinted with all the information and the, I guess, parenting style of your parents and stuff, and that's going to shape you as a person too. So it's the nature of who you are, what it means to be a human, and then it's the nurture of how you're taken care of. And you have the infinite number of combos between, you could have gotten a really good dice roll on your genetics, or maybe you're very healthy, or maybe you got a really good dice roll on your parents, or you got bad rolls on both, or some mixture of the two.
Yeah, there's a lot of dice rolling going on. You pointed out something nice that is directly related to how we decided to have a kid. And we talked about this, must have been 1.5 years ago, a bit more. So we decided to have a kid a day or two after doing a bunch of drops in Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not to say that drugs lead you necessarily towards good decisions or bad ones for that. It's just that it's a matter of perspective. Your outlook on life will make a big difference whether or not you want to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And ayahuasca providing us with a different outlook or a different perspective on the same outlook was what led us to knowing that we could do this, and if we wanted to do this, then now is the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you get older, more so for females than for males, there's a time where you kind of want to get kids if you want to have them, because otherwise it gets trickier and trickier as you get older.
Yeah.
My wife is now 37. 38? 37.
Cool, yeah. That's one of the things where a lot of women experience pressure from family or friends or both or partner to make babies and do it fast because there are more complications that can occur the older that you get. Because I think a woman is born with the total number of eggs that she's going to have, and then with each period, you're -1 with that. So there's a limited supply, and the quality of the egg goes down over time, which means lots of fun social pressures. Yeah. It does change a lot for your priority system too, because for the woman, the burden of reproduction is much higher, right? Because you didn't have to seahorse it and carry a baby inside you. You were just running moral support and probably physical support throughout that process.
Yeah, but the support roles are important.
Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about relationships and dating and so on. And one thing that I've heard from a lot of guys is they feel like it's too difficult to, I don't know, win over someone's heart or to get the attention of women. And I feel like one of the things that guys really have to put in front of themselves is that because women have a lot more risks associated with having sex, for example, they could get pregnant, it's a lot scarier of a prospect, which means they need to be more selective about who they're mating with. So just because you feel like you worked hard on your dating app profile doesn't mean people are going to be running at you, because you need lots of other information to make sure that's a good decision, especially as a woman where you might need to deal with pregnancy at some point in the future. And that also means that during pregnancy and after you have a child, you need some protection. You need to have someone around you who you can rely on, who's going to give you security and safety and reassurance as well. And even if you have the most crisp jawline on the planet and maybe you hit the gym every day, it doesn't mean that you're actually going to be a good partner. You need to make them feel like they're a priority and that you're going to take care of them and stuff. So to me, it makes complete sense that it would be harder for guys to get the attention of women, just because the effort that we have to put forth to make a pregnancy happen is much less than what a woman has to do. We do have some sex differences when it comes to that.
Yeah, but those can be some stressful couple of minutes.
True.
Just saying, this always gets diminished. And I'm kind of like, yeah, but I put in the effort. 2 minutes at least.
There were some good minutes.
Yeah, so in terms of reasons to have children, I think there's, as you already said, there's a lot of social pressure, and it feels like one of the steps you have to make in life to kind of be proper part of society, almost, where it's like, get a job, get married, get kids, yeah, now die of old age. It's kind of, or no, buy a house, guess is also in there. But it's one of the last stages of what we're actually expected, which is nice and also kind of scary.
Yeah, mortality is really weird, thinking that we all have that lifespan development, and everyone just goes through the stages one time, so you gotta enjoy it while it's going. Seeing the next generation grow up. What is your child? Are they Generation Alpha? Is that what they're called?
Yes, he's an alpha.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I was wondering how they'll be called, and when I realized, I was like, that's nice.
Yep. It's a cool one. The first. Don't tell them that we just ran out of letters in the alphabet and had to start over again. You're after the Zoomas.
Well, by the time they realize that, there's already another generation of betas they can make fun of.
Yep.
So
Oh man.
I don't think they will mind as much.
Yep.
Yeah, so other reasons to have kids is economics, which is to say that based on your spawning locations, having kid is the best or the only thing you can do to get retirement money.
I didn't know that.
Well, this is sub-Saharan Africa. This is a big thing. Like, usually in cultures where they have a lot of children, this is one of the main reasons. And I don't think this is a necessarily good reason. Then again, if you grew up in a country like that, it's a good reason. Like, you want to have some kind of security. Like, I understand it, but if you don't have to, you shouldn't just get a kid for economic reasons, because it costs a lot of money.
Yeah, I would think that having a kid is going to be a greater cost than it is going to be a boon in terms of just the money side of it, because you have to pay for all their food, and that's a lot of just energy they need to consume, and then you need more room in your shelter perhaps, and then if they're going to school, there are a bunch of costs associated with that. You have to clothe your child. It is expensive. They've done different metrics. I could just Google how much does it cost to have a child.
Yeah, but this is also, we're looking from a Western perspective. In other countries, you could just send your kid into a clothing factory and they'll bring home some amount of money. Not to say this is a good thing, just this is the reality for some people, where this is a good way of making money over a prolonged period of time. Like, it's a worthwhile investment if they're good workers, that is.
It says the average for US is $16,000 to $18,000 a year for raising a child.
That sounds rather cheap.
Yeah, in California it's $35,000. So it kind of depends on what state you're in.
And I guess it gets more and more expensive, especially in terms of school tuition as they get older, if you want them to go to higher schools.
Yep.
And there's little in terms of government support for having children, as far as I know, in the US.
Yeah, I don't really know what the support is. I think you get some tax breaks on it, so they try to ease some of that burden, but it is still a net cost for sure. Child tax credit is what it's called. Thank you, Chad. Yeah, I guess Trisha's asking, how do you get money from having kids? I don't know who would be able to have kids and that's a net positive for gaining money. I feel like you're pretty much always going to be paying out, unless you already have, say your housing is taken care of by some other means, and then you do potentially get some kind of government stipend.
I think having a job is easier than having kids, and you probably make more money. Like, this doesn't sound like a good deal for me. Like, having someone around you need to take care of 24/7, other than working a 9-to-5 job, getting less money out of it. Not sure on if the math works out there. Religious reasons for having children. There's two things I can think of here. One is to have the argument that is ongoing in the US right now on whether you want to or need to have an unborn child because your religion forbids you to have an abortion.
Oh, yeah.
which is a spicy debate I don't think we should get into too much. My view on is that it should be the parent's choice whether or not they want to have a kid. Up until some point, which I couldn't clearly tell you where the kid is kid enough, or where the unborn child is child enough for this not to be viable anymore. And I don't think we'll ever find a number there that would be universal and everyone could agree on. And the other thing is that I think it should always be possible if you have a high enough likelihood of some DNA mutation that would lead towards a less desirable outcome.
Yeah, that's one of the big debates of our time, I guess, because abortion technology has gotten relatively more streamlined to where it's more of an option for more people, but it still does have a lot of controversy surrounding it because a lot of people believe that an unborn fetus has the right to live. So it's kind of like, when do you bestow the rights upon that? Is it as soon as the sperm meets the egg? Is it a certain stage of the development cycle? It really depends on who you ask. And I feel like it's hard to be the referee to say, okay, if you cross this line, then you can't anymore. But we have basic concepts that we use to understand it. Like, you don't want to inflict pain on a creature, so as its nervous system improves, there's a greater chance that that's going to happen, kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's a tough debate. Although most other countries than the US have it figured out to a degree where it's not as divisive. But it changes as well, so we seem to lean more towards the religious argument these days than we used to, which is an interesting development. But this very much depends on the religion of a given region.
Yeah, I know a lot of Christians are against it.
It makes sense when you consider... Yeah, it really depends on where you see personhood starting. And once an egg is fertilized, there is a distinct potential for a human coming out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
So the next argument is sustaining the human race. This is what we touched on a bit already with the antinatalism thing. So sustaining the human race is probably the worst thing you can do for the environment. That is, if you see the environment as being something outside of humanity, which I think is not necessarily right. But yeah, the humans are pretty bad for every other species on the planet. Except for rats, I think they're probably doing pretty well. Cockroaches.
Some other ones that I've noticed, because I live in LA now and it's super, super urban and super populated. Ravens benefit from our success because they can fly around. Our traffic and stuff doesn't really hurt them. We're not really a natural predator of ravens, so there are a lot of bird species that can thrive with humans. Pigeons as well in cities will be really populous. Seagulls don't give a fuck about humans. They're really populous. Raccoons, they can eat human garbage, so they're having a good time. And then there's also the various animals that we use for animal husbandry in some contexts. It could be having dogs that you use for managing the ranch or use for protection or something, or cats to deal with pest control or farming and stuff like that. But yeah, we definitely wield the paintbrush now on the world, and we are absolutely a species that is infringing upon other species' territories and kind of reducing their range. So we are the natural predator to lots of stuff now. But yeah, most animal species are not happy with our expansionism, but there are a select few that have figured out how to benefit from our growth.
Yeah, and we might be able, willing, or we just do it by accident to take them down with us if we fuck up enough. So, like, flying with us might not have been the best choice. It is for now. Then there's one other thing, which is sustaining not necessarily the human race, but what you consider to be your peer group. So basically you want to have enough white children so other races don't take over. I've only seen this as a white thing before, which is really stupid reason to have children, and really stupid fucking argument.
I know what it's from. I actually am reading a book called American Nations. I'm assuming you mean like Americans who are being silly and racist about this. But there was a period in the US in the Deep South where the whole economy was plantation based. And it was usually a small select number of elite, usually British aristocrats who would control a plantation with lots of workers under them who were usually European descent, and then a bunch of slaves, which were usually African descent. And there was a rumor that was started by, I'm not sure if it was the British that started this or this was their own conspiracy theory, but they were worried that because they were rebelling against the British crown, they were worried that the British were sending over large amounts of guns to take over the whole country. So they've had a fear of slave uprising and for slaves to take over for hundreds of years at this point, and I feel like a lot of those cultural beliefs are passed down from generation to generation, so you still have that fear of what if we are taken over or replaced. People who haven't lived in the South or they don't have that cultural background, it seems like nonsense, right? Because there are millions of any kind of human at this point, pretty much. So it's silly. And then also, the lines between different types of people aren't clear lines. A lot of people will self-identify and they'll say, I'm German, or I'm Polish, or I'm Chinese. You are maybe some of that, but everyone is a bunch of other stuff too. So the faster that we can realize that humans are more similar than they are different, and you should be kind of focusing on collaboration and supporting each other rather than trying to like fence off people who look different from yourself, the sooner that we can be productive and stop fighting.
Yeah, nice tidbit on that is late or mid 19th century, for you to be considered white in the US, you not only needed to be of Northern European descent, but also Protestant. Like you could be the most Aryan guy possible. If you were a Catholic, you were not considered to be white, which should give you a hint on how specific or rather unspecific this whole notion is.
Yeah, that was an interesting phase of the US where it was like putting people into categories based on how desirable they were for immigrating to the country. I think we still have that for pretty much any country. People want the immigrants to support the existing culture and traditions rather than to be different and go against them, because a lot of times you do have that cultural heritage and you want to make sure you have a distinct history and way of doing things in your country. So when foreigners are coming in, there's always the worry that they might become the majority. But it's kind of silly in the sense that people who are immigrants usually don't have that like power structure in place to enforce anything upon you. Normally they're just trying to fit in and get by.
Yeah, and if you want to make sure this is happening, you should spend a lot more money on integrating people. That's the way of getting them into the same culture. It's not by not like completely isolate, I guess could work too. It would most likely lead towards extinction due to too small of a gene pool eventually. This will take a couple of generations, but depending on the size, most likely you'd die out because you don't have enough people to make viable children with anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do benefit from. Yeah, we do benefit from diversity. That was one of the things that we saw. Partly a factor for the collapse of monarchy in a lot of countries was a lot of royal lines would try to only mix with other royal lines, which really lowers your population size, and you're having people procreate with others who are already very similar to themselves, which doesn't really give you as much survival benefit as if you mate with someone who does have more differences from your own genetic code. And the closer you are to the person that you're mating with, also the higher risk you have of birth defects and stuff. So diversity is a strength for us. Being able to mate with people who aren't in our family is generally seen as the way to go.
What if your first cousin looks really good?
Yep, then you might just need to manage that impulse.
Fair enough. One other thing I wrote down here is projecting. This meaning that you want to have kids for them to fulfill the dreams that you couldn't fulfill yourself.
Oh, there's an anime character who's like this. Who's seen My Hero Academia? This is Endeavor. Endeavor is a very strong, very angry, and bitter fire user. He uses fire as his power, and he's very strong, but he feels like he's never going to be able to be the strongest in the world because he feels like fire on its own is limiting. So he tries to get an ice-using wife, and he's trying to have a kid that can use both. But he has a fire kid, and he has 2 ice kids, and he doesn't treat any of them well because he's projecting his desire to be the ultimate hero by imposing that fate upon the select child that's like bred to have both fire and ice. So he ends up being a very bad father. And a lot of the show is kind of about that pursuit and the dark side of that pursuit, where you're imposing your will on a child and basically telling them that their purpose is your purpose and they must pursue your same path, which is a lot of pressure. I think that's probably one of the things that you might have already thought about on your own, is like, how is your child going to be similar to you and how are they going to be different from you? Are they going to pursue philosophy, or are they going to hate it and go in a very different direction and be unlike you in some ways? It's really hard to know, I feel like, as a parent, to decide how much leeway you want to give them of letting them be more different from yourself versus keeping with the family ways.
So a bunch of things I want to say there. First off, with the anime, I was thinking this over, and I think the result should be a water kid, because like the fire melts the ice and you have water left that distinguishes the fire at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's not an elemental option, I guess like they pretty much cancel each other out, so that doesn't.
Yeah, the way that
both doesn't seem viable.
Yeah, the way that the kid uses it is he uses the cool to make sure that he can use as much heat as he needs, and he doesn't like overheat, or he doesn't get too cold using the cold, so he can balance himself in that way. And it's like one side of his body does one and one side does the other. Very cool, but it does show that problematic aspect of the parent imposing their purpose upon the child.
Yeah. In terms for our own kid, there's 2 things. First is that we want to give him the best opportunities to decide for himself, but with some clear boundaries. There's some things that would get him kicked out of the family immediately, like picking the wrong type of music or choosing a bodyboard over a surfboard. There's like certain no-goes that
playing
he's not
Terran.
allowed to cross. Yeah, there's certain things that we just don't want to have in a family.
Makes sense.
No, but other than that, I guess he will have a lot of different inputs from both me and his mother. So it'd be too much for him to pick, and I'm looking forward to see what he will really like.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also some givens. Us growing up in the Alps, he'll be a good snowboarder rather soon. He'll be an outdoorsy type, but he'll also have enough nerd in him to know how to cannon rush.
That's good. That's important. You need to stand up for yourself in class and cannon rush your bullies.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to find out what he's interested in. For now, he's interested in mostly all the things that we tell him not to play with. Those are by far the most interesting. Like he's got a clear understanding of what is a toy and what is not a toy, and everything that's not a toy is just super interesting. Toilet brushes, toilet paper, the toilet itself. It's funny.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because your kid is still in the time frame where they're not speaking in complete sentences and stuff, but they're still thinking things when they look at their environment and wondering why things are the way they are, because the reality that they're born into is kind of random, and the technology that we have relative to human history and prehistory is very random. So the fact that they're born in the 21st century and there are things such as toilet brushes and smartphones and computers and stuff, it's pretty weird. So it'll take a little bit to figure out how to navigate everything. And I've heard that babies basically test out what things are by putting them in their mouth. So you have to keep a sharp eye on that.
Yeah, we try to facilitate, and this is due to us having learned with the dog, to basically put everything out of reach that he's not allowed to touch anyway. So we don't have to run after him telling him no to this or that thing. So basically, if he can grab it, for the most part, he's allowed to grab it.
Makes sense.
Sometimes it's more about how he grabs it, especially my chest hair, which is just super not fun to have happen. Like, there's limit there's also, but it's nice to be able to facilitate a home for him where he can just crawl around and try to open up everything, take out everything, and then we can clean after him. Also, we have a lot of our cupboards are closed. There's a bunch of things you have to do if you want to do this, to basically not have the kid be able to grab knives or grab the silverware or grab glasses and stuff, like everything he could have hurt himself with.
Yeah, true.
But it's really nice once you did it that you can just let your kid roam free.
Yep, kid-proofing it. I had to do a mini set of that with just making sure my stuff was cat-proofed, because cats like to mess with stuff sometimes, push things off desks and so on. So I cat-proofed the top of my PC. There's a statue of All Might that's on there now. He wasn't on the PC before because Loki was jumping on my computer. So that's a blocker for that. And then I have some zip ties that I used for cable management. But he hasn't turned off my computer yet. He hasn't broken anything. I did put my camera on a mount to my desk now, so he can't knock that off, and my monitors are also mounted. So my setup is cat-proofed, and I haven't had anything break. Thanks, Loki. But yeah, kids, you have to even more so watch out for it, because they have those dangerous things called opposable thumbs. They can grab things better than other creatures.
They're super fast, especially grabbing cups of coffee, cups of tea, anything in a cup basically, but it's usually hot.
That's one thing that I think my upbringing was a little bit different from my brother's. My mom was really cautious about feeding me any overly hot food because she didn't want to burn my mouth. So I didn't really have hot food for the first several years of my life. And I think now I'm a little bit more heat sensitive to stuff that's very hot. Like, I don't need my coffee scalding hot, but some people love that. You have a lot of those different decisions of when do you allow your child exposure to this new thing. It could be stuff that's tough and they have to chew, so you have to wait for their teeth to be ready for that. It could be hot things. And then it also could be like physical challenges like sports. You're very active and so is your wife, so I feel like they're going to have lots of opportunities for that.
Yeah. And I think it's a lot of things. It's just what you do naturally, where you just take the kid with you, because it's like you can't just leave it chained in the bedroom as you would do with a dog, which is also not necessarily a good call, but it's a bit different with a kid. So you take them just everywhere if you can, and so a lot of things will feel natural to them before they even notice what's happening.
True. Yeah, just by having that experience of exposure to it. Random question, and you might not have decided this yet, but when do you think your kids will have smartphone access and stuff? Or I guess you're one child.
This is a big topic, and I've talked to a bunch of my friends about it, and
It will be a while until we have to decide. But basically, for now, it's more about regulating ourselves, not being at the phone all the time, rather than regulating the kid. But he's already super interested in it, and it will be hard to give him a good sense of how to regulate himself when it comes to media consumption, as it is hard for us to regulate ourselves. It's like the internet is super addictive. I'm not sure, like, children's YouTube looks kind of boring, but I guess for children it's quite addictive as well. I think it will be quite a while until he has a cell phone, but I want him to grow up with some amount of media, this being as natural as anything else, but it's natural in a more limited degree. It's not something you do all day. It's something you do once a week maybe, or twice a week.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Really clear boundaries around that.
Yeah, I just Googled it, seeing what people think for when kids should have smartphones, because maybe showing my age a little bit here, but smartphones didn't exist when I was a kid. It wasn't until I was like a late teenager when iPhones were coming out and so on. So phones back in the day used to have maybe a couple games on them, but they didn't have like full internet access and everything. So it used to be just a telephone. Now it's a computer in your pocket. And Google says people think that like 13 years old is kind of okay for starting smartphone stuff. There's a statistic that said it was like 91% of kids have a smartphone by the time that they're 14. 42% of kids have a smartphone by age 10. And obviously you can put on child protection and stuff like that, so you limit the access of it somewhat. There's a lot of stuff on the internet you don't want them browsing right away. I was somewhat sheltered from a lot of the violence and terror of the world. That was one thing that my parents chose to do, was limit my exposure to like the violence of war and stuff like that. I think a lot of other parents do that too, but they wanted to give me a time to enjoy my childhood and not worry about conflicts around the planet. That does seem to be a problem with people with the media access, smartphones, and the internet, is doom scrolling and constantly browsing the next like really hateful spat between two peoples around the world that are constantly fighting each other, and it just ends up being a lot of mental weight on an individual to process all the conflicts and all the suffering on the planet. And that's kind of the double edge of what internet access can bring you is it can bring you a lot of fun and excitement and new stuff, but it can also darken you in the sense of it shows the ugly side of humanity as well. So it's a lot.
Yeah, and I think we all now, being on Twitch, can relate to how hard it can be for ourselves. So being a good role model there for a kid is really tricky.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say I find 13 to be like, once puberty kicks in, they will want that level of freedom to be able to browse stuff on the internet that you as a parent don't necessarily want them to see.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense, and then it becomes about talking to them on how to go about it, how to contextualize what they're seeing.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, especially with like religious perspectives as well. I'm assuming you're alluding to like sexual content and just how that's a part of the internet, and also physical self-care, aka masturbation, is a thing that mammals do. So that's one of those conversations that's like awkward to have with people, but it's necessary because that's a normal human behavior. But a lot of different religious persuasions will say that you should abstain entirely. What I was taught growing up, I think the name of the guy was Dr. Dobson. He's written a lot of like Christian parenthood books. There was a book that I was given that he wrote about for like young boys growing up and so on. And I believe it was, don't start masturbating if you haven't already, but if you have already, it's basically impossible to stop, so just try to not be ridiculous.
Well, I think trying not to be ridiculous is a good rule in life, no matter what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're a comedian, then it's kind of good to be ridiculous.
Yeah.
So if you're ridiculous in the first place, just choose the right line to do it in.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't necessarily or not only referring to sexual stuff. It's also, like, as you said, the getting a better sense of what the world really is like outside of how you grow up as a kid can be tough. And there's a lot of shit going on, and kind of putting that into perspective is really tricky.
Yeah, one of the things that you'll have to teach them is the amount of deception that's on the internet. And it's not obvious to people because we do have the bias of credulity where we tend to believe people rather than disbelieve, and how a lot of information on the internet is false information. A lot of it has like a very strong slant or bias to it. And then some of it is just like drama that you don't really need to get pulled into, that is kind of inappropriate to even have on the internet. I've seen for the younger generation and stuff, people will throw their high school drama on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. Kind of how back in the day we used to do posts on Zanga or MySpace, where if you had like a really emotional breakup, you do this big Zanga post where you're writing about all the stuff that happened and so on. And it's really interesting that our social interactions have changed with us sharing information on the internet. It used to just be face-to-face. You had to speak to someone or you had to write a letter or something. But yeah, the internet has a lot of interesting and different social options that we didn't have in the past. So you do have to teach your children how to navigate that, how to stay safe, how to not click on scam stuff, which is relatively hard because there's so many scams.
Yeah. Yeah, but this goes into just general life skills of being critical about whatever you're seeing and doing, and just thinking, yeah, just not going with your first instinct, but thinking things through.
Mm-hmm.
I talked with my brother. He had a kid 6 weeks older than our kid. So basically, we realized the other one got their wife pregnant once we called up to tell them about our kid, which is a really awesome experience that we kind of get to see the kids go through the same stages at roughly the same time.
Oh yeah,
So
that's
it's
cool.
just a lot of things to connect over all the time. It's like, all right, how many times did yours fall today because he was trying to stand up? Yeah, ours does the same. It's really cool. And I don't know how we got on the subject, but we talked about. I know how we got on the subject. It was someone, a good friend of mine, claiming that the biggest problem with the generation coming after us is not they're doing the wrong drugs, is they're not doing enough drugs, which is not a statement I'm going to defend. But basically, the topic was, how do you teach your kids how to act responsibly around drugs? Because there's a lot of addictive things, a lot of things that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And go on.
One of the critiques of the DARE movement that we had in the US, which was like, just say no, was their slogan, just say no to drugs. It ends up being deceptive in the sense that it puts all drugs in the same category of danger, which is very false. Certain drugs you can have in pretty high volume and they're not going to permanently injure you. And then certain drugs you can straight up die if you have too much of them. So understanding the relative danger of drugs is really important, because people will get in situations where they offer stuff to you. And that's a really tricky situation, because oftentimes you might feel pressure where it's uncool if you don't take something, or people won't include you in stuff in the future if you don't partake with them. But I took a really good class in college called Integrative Neuroscience, and it broke down the different classes of psychoactive drugs and how they work on the body. It talked about psychedelic drugs like ayahuasca, like you had, LSD and mushrooms would also be in this category. And then there were opiates, which is another category. Those just work on the direct pain pleasure pathways. This would be stuff like morphine, cocaine, heroin, the stuff that's generally considered really heavy and really strong, and that stuff can kill you and also can be very physically addictive. And breaking down the difference between physical addiction, which is a physical need where your body will start freaking out and breaking down if you don't get your fix. And then there's psychological addiction, which is you will get sad and grumpy if you don't get your thing that you really like, say World of Warcraft or browsing memes or something, whatever that might be. So for me, I was kind of eyes opened with, okay, wow, there are lots of different types of drugs, and some of these seem relatively harmless. Like you could still have, say, serotonin syndrome if you had too much ecstasy, or you could have a sort of panic attack if you take a psychedelic and you're predisposed to that. So there are definitely things you have to account for any kind of experience, but some drugs are straight up way more dangerous than others. So certain kids, say for example, they were told just say no to all drugs, and then they try weed and it's fine. They might assume, based on that discovery, that all drugs are fine, which is untrue, but because they were somewhat deceived into thinking that all drugs are bad, say no to everything, they ended up feeling like, okay, well then I can just go for whatever. But we do have a lot of socially acceptable drugs in society, like coffee and tea have caffeine in them, which is a drug, and it does impact the body in many different ways. We have alcohol, which is a mainstay of what people have at restaurants and with their meals and so on. Absolutely, definitely super a drug, and that is one that people can get physically addicted to and also OD from.
Boba tea time.
Trisha running in, giving me ice cream. Thank you.
Ice cream can also be an addiction, not necessarily a drug.
Sugar gives you a pretty good head high.
Yeah, sugar's pretty good. So what I was trying to do was to kind of come up with a simple rule that would kind of not regulate drug reuse, because regulation is not possible, but just give them a good sense or give them good behavior surrounding drugs. And what I came up with is just basically, if you can tell your kids that drugs can be dangerous, and most of the really bad things that happen around drugs is because everyone's high. So you always want to have at least someone there to look after the others and be able to call for help if something goes wrong. And if they understand that, and you can tell them, all right, if no one else wants to not get high, you be the first one and the first night. And if you still like what you see after that, you might as well go for it. But just make sure there's someone there that can take after you.
Yeah, they call it a sitter sometimes, someone who's effectively the babysitter. So when people get drunk and stupid or high and stupid, there's someone who can be an adult and say, hey, you need to drink some water and lie down. You're not a helicopter. Yeah. You are not a helicopter. You're a person. You need to lay down.
Yeah, so that's the best I can come up with.
Oh, chat with a good note. If it's illegal, don't use it. That's true. You do incur the risk of criminal activity if you take a drug that is illegal in your municipality, or if you possess such a substance.
Yeah. I'm not going to make any statements on whether or not I ever did illegal stuff, but it's safe to say that all the heavier stuff I did was legal. Because I moved to another jurisdiction to do it.
Yeah. Is ayahuasca legal in Costa Rica?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's legal in Costa Rica, Colombia, Panama, Brazil for sure. I guess that's about it. How did we get this was a side question. So I have three more reasons, and these are the good reasons in my opinion now, to have children. One is the desire to have children. If you want to have children, it's nice to be able to then have children. If you don't want to have children, you probably shouldn't be forced to have children, or you shouldn't go out there and make children if you do not want them.
Makes sense. Use protection if you don't want to get pregnant.
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
The other reason is time. Basically, you have too much time on your hand, and
I'm bored. Let's have a child.
I don't think boredom is the right reason, but just I wrote something a bit before my kid was born, and it's like, basically, if you're doing your job right as a parent and things go semi-well, you see someone grow up and have a significant influence on who they develop into being, just by the amount of time you spend with them, by the amount of influence you obviously have as a parent. So you're in a sense grooming a friend you'll have for the rest of your life. This can be really nice. Like, you'll see this person grow up, and if things go well, they will be there when you take your last breath.
I'm thinking of Confucius now for some reason.
This makes sense. It's not it. I guess it takes the kind of outlook of seeing yourself as mortal and knowing that you have a limited amount of time, and so spending time with good people is about as good a time we can spend as humans, in my opinion. Other than surfing, which you don't want to have too many people because then it just gets messy. So yeah, I think just having someone, you enjoy their company and they enjoy yours, and you get to spend as much time as you can with them is just basically awesome. It's how you get together as a couple, and then having a child is an extension of that. And so what I wrote back then was that I'm very excited to meet my, like, basically it's I'll meet a friend once he gets born, and I don't know who he is at that point. He probably doesn't know yet as well, but we have hopefully a lot of time to figure this out together, which is just an awesome outlook for me.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see what their personality is like. You can probably already guess some things about their personality, like how adventurous or shy a child is. I feel like you might be able to see that pretty early.
Yeah, I think he's super adventurous. He's not super courageous, I guess is the right word to say. It's like he's definitely not shy. So he's outgoing. He's always laughing at stuff. So I think he's quite funny, or at least he thinks we're quite funny.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting to also see, like, since my sample size is very limited, to see his cousin in comparison. Since they're the same age, you kind of get, all right, this kid is a bit more like that, the other kid is a bit more like that. So you get to see the characteristics of your kid a lot more through other kids than through the kid itself, because it's just the kid.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have any reference.
That's true. My parents, going back to, you have some friends who have a kid that's about the same stages of development. I think I have a cousin who was maybe 1 year different from me, so my parents would be able to like take turns babysitting and stuff, and also just talk about the progress of how the child is developing and so on. It can definitely be a bonding thing for parents to talk with other parents, and also to vent about the stressful parts of it.
Yeah, it's nice to have people, like, it's a lot of stress, especially within the first couple of months, years, decades. I'm not sure just yet. Could be a while. So having other people to talk to, and to also get a reference on how you're doing things. And with most things parenting, there's no right or wrong. There's different degrees of, does it work or does it not work? And it's always fun to kind of see what worked on your kid might not work on another, and it's just it's rather random. It's fun to experiment.
Chat saying they're terrified of having a child who isn't a great person. Your brother is a narcissist. It's been hard on your parents. I wonder how much of that is open to influence from teaching and nurture. That's one thing that it's really hard to measure about a person, because you see the current end result of a person, of their nature plus their nurture, and it's how much of that behavior was their nature versus how much of that was their environment shaping them. And is it possible to shape them in a way that is, let's say, what's the opposite of narcissism? Being relaxed about yourself around others? Let's say a narcissist is a person who's overly obsessed with their own attention and focus within the group, to the point that they don't allow other people to be happy or celebrated. Empathetic, you would say, is the opposite of narcissistic?
Because it could lead towards a bunch of different outcomes where you just need outside validation more, because a narcissist basically gets all the validation from themselves. This could be like another extreme. Yeah, I find this hard to tell. What I wanted to say though is, what changed for me having a kid myself, I thought there'd be more nurture than nature, like not on a scale of 100%. It's just like I've seen this baby, and I soon realized there's a lot of inherent stuff in there already, for better or for worse, that is like you're still doing a lot with your nurturing, but some things are just set from the get-go, more so than I would have wanted to believe beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was quite shocked at first. Like, not shocked in a bad way. It's super interesting to see, but this is not what I expected. I expected more of a blank slate that I could kind of mold into something.
Oh, you're saying the child has more of their own kind of pre-programmed mindset for how they want to do stuff?
Yeah, very
Gotcha.
much so.
Gotcha. What are some of the things that are already scripted in that you didn't expect?
It's not that I didn't expect it. It's just like it shows more clearly than you would expect. Like he has a will of its own. If he's a super happy kid for the most part, but if he wants something like my cup of coffee, he'll be super outraged when he doesn't get it.
Yeah.
And this was fun until he learned about object permanence. It's like hiding the cup is not good enough anymore. He wants the fucking cup.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do now is drink the cup in the kitchen, and it's basically empty by the time I leave the kitchen, and then he's okay to play with it, and he ruined 3 of our cups already.
Oh, by dropping them?
Yes.
Gotcha.
It's fun to drop them. They make a lot of fun noises.
It makes a smash sound, and then my parents are all fussing around on the ground below me. It makes me feel very powerful. That's funny. Well, that makes me think of our cat Loki. Object permanence is something that like will get him really activated to chase things. If you have an object and you wave it in front of him, he doesn't care. But if you have an object and then it goes behind a wall or a corner or something, then he needs to know what happened to it. So definitely increases his interest in something if it disappears.
Yeah, it's super funny when you can hide things from a kid and it's gone forever. Like they have no sense of it ever having been there. I guess it is a short-term memory thing, but once this changes, they start to crawl around things to retrieve your phone back, which you obviously put somewhere and forgot there because it was obviously they wanted it and you kind of wanted to give it to them, but then something weird happened and now it's over there, so they have to get it there. The interesting thing there is kind of like it's not a super long time span they can focus on something. So basically, if you put your phone or whatever the kid wants about 3 feet away from you, they will crawl directly for it. If it's 10 feet away and there's other stuff in between, chances are pretty high they get distracted on the way there.
Yeah, one
Which
thing
is also super funny to watch.
Yeah. You're talking about the kid being outraged when they don't get the coffee cup. I feel like there also is such a small level of experience that a child has had, so they don't really have the same understanding of emotional regulation of what is truly a tragedy versus what is a mild inconvenience. Because they will screech and howl as though their body is being ripped in half whenever they don't get their way. But they don't realize, like, the true depths of darkness that can happen to a person in life. All they understand is, I wasn't allowed to have this cup, and this is the most upsetting thing that has ever happened to me.
Yeah, so there's a raging debate about whether or not you can perceive yourself in a mirror if you're not a narcissist, which I think is, in my opinion, misunderstanding what narcissism is and confusing the word with ego. I think we need to have an ego in order to recognize ourselves, like knowing that there is an us, but this is not the same as being a narcissist or having narcissism.
Yeah, you need some self-concept Because even though humans are multicellular and we have lots of different systems that all kind of compete for what our behavior is ultimately going to be, society treats us as individuals, so we also need to have some concept of who we are and what impact we have in the world. It also helps us to understand our ego and our self, just to be able to make predictions about how other people are going to treat you. So you have to do a lot of mental calculations of, okay, I've known these people for this long, this is how things have went, so I think they perceive me this way. Or you can ask them about that and that kind of a thing. But yeah, it's definitely a useful thinking tool for contextualizing our reality.
This is one of the tests they do with children, whether or not they're able to recognize themselves in the mirror. And I find this super hard to tell. Sometimes he's very fascinated by the person in the mirror, other times he's bored by them. It's like the usual way they test this is by marking the kids and then seeing whether or not they remove the mark from them because they see it in the mirror.
Oh yeah.
So we haven't done that just yet, but just because I'm afraid he might not be able to recognize himself. This usually happens around 3 or 4 years of age, if I'm not mistaken. So it basically, seeing yourself in the mirror is fucking weird. Not only because your left is right and right is left.
Yeah, mirror studies is one of the ones that people use with animals too, to kind of assess how aware they are, how intelligent they are.
So our dog is aware of all the usual mirrors it sees itself in. Whenever it goes into an elevator, for example, that has a mirror on ground level, she's super shocked about the other dog in the elevator that just came out of nowhere.
Who is that dog and why are they so good looking? Oh wait, it's me.
Yeah, I think we kind of already got into the last reason I could find off the top of my head to have children, which I find reasonable. It's a same argument than projecting what you want on a kid, but in another way, where it's like you want to have a kid because you want the challenge, but you also basically you're aware of what's been going wrong in your life, and you would want to see what would happen if you had a different set of skills growing up, and what would have become you or someone like you with another set of tools.
Well, that makes sense.
And this is basically you're trying to delete errors of the past by moving into the future, which also could lead you down some very bad roads. But I think in general it's like trying to get rid of the mistakes of the past and making new mistakes along the way is a pretty good way of going about it. And you'll never get everything right. You'll get you'll fuck up a bunch of things, but just being aware of that and trying to do the best you can is about as good as a generalized ethic as I can find. So just trying your best and cleaning up the mess if there is one.
Makes sense. I see next we have the how-to.
Yeah.
How to make a baby.
I was thinking about whether or not I should find like a nice clip of bees and flowers, but basically I think we all know how the technical stuff works, so this is not, I guess it'd be interesting to talk about, but TOS forbids us from going into any of the nice details. What I can say though, since we did do the philosophy of butts a couple of years ago, butt stuff doesn't work. So this is not how to get a baby.
You know, I was actually misled my neighbor from across the street when I was in elementary school, he came over to play Dreamcast or whatever video game console we were playing, and he was really excited one day because he was like, dude, and I was like, what? I found out how babies happen. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, I heard, you know your thingy? You put it in her butt. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah. Oh. And that's how he knew the secret. But then I found out it wasn't actually in the butt. It doesn't work.
Kind of close.
In the neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's already getting pretty late here, and I don't have to get up, but someone will be up in the same room I'm sleeping in about 7-ish hours from now.
That's fair.
So I think we go through the how to make it thing and then have some questions and whatnot, and then call it a day and do everything that's actual having to do with having children on the next one.
Cool. Well, appreciate you coming on and discussing this with us, because I know it's a lot, and I moved too, so thanks all in chat for your patience for us getting this show going again.
Yeah, it's... But when people ask me how it is to basically have a kid, it's like having the kid is the easy part. Having time for anything else is the hard part.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But yeah, it's nice to be back on here and have some lovely discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think we know how to make babies in general. Nowadays, there's some other ways you can achieve the same thing. There's also some differences in what we can do before both conception and after to see what the result will be. Basically, having designer kids to a very limited degree. Basically, we don't understand enough about the what I would consider to be the interesting part of genetics to get a kid with the trait you want. You'd rather get the look you want, which is kind of boring if you ask me. But if you could like select for smarter would be interesting. Not sure if I would necessarily go for that one, or more active. Like there's so many things we don't understand just yet. You can choose eye color and hair color and maybe how tall they are, but that's about it as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
And this will become different as we go forward, and it will become more and more of an ethical mess as we go along this path.
Yeah, there's so many ethical decisions that you have to make as a parent, because you're not just making your own life decisions, but you're making decisions for the child before they're of the age where they can be really held responsible for stuff. And I guess it depends a little bit on what country you're in, but a lot of countries it's 18 you're considered an adult, and that's when you can be convicted of crimes. So that's like the final checkpoint of, okay, now you're actually fully responsible for yourself and for your stuff. So for you have to assess not just how to parent your child and what is good for them, but you have to do so in a new time. And it's always been the case, right? That you exist in a new time where things haven't existed before in the past, but we're in a very unique one in that we have all this technology around us. And that's been the theme of the first couple Mindset 101 discussions that I did. Just how you now have to decide, like we did the smartphone discussion before, you have to decide how your kids will navigate the internet and when, how they'll navigate gaming and when, and how much of that, when these were things that weren't really around 200,000 years ago. You just had sticks. You could play games, throw a rock at people. Sure, that's a game.
Yeah, so this is the subject we'll get into much more in the next one. But basically, we did a bunch of reading before we got a kid, and we got recommended one book that unfortunately it's not available in English. It's a German book by a German author. It's called Altgerecht, which is, I'm not even sure how to translate it. It's basically similar to the species needs as they were a couple of thousand years ago. And it was funny, my brother had the same book, and they have, in many ways, a different approach to how we do it. And it's very interesting because it really breaks down a lot of different parts of parenthood into how it was done a couple of thousand years ago. And like, children are not that different, as the whole species is not that different. We just got a bunch of fancy gadgets for the most part, and we need to learn how to handle these. But in terms of emotional needs, in terms of nutritional needs, they're still the same as they were 10,000 years or 100,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into that when we talk about pregnancy and how, or the whole birth, fourth trimester, all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as to what we're talking about now, I think it's important to know that we're not that complicated. We just make a whole bunch of things really complicated due to social factors.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the core principles of the book is that you need a village to raise a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just you, it's not just the primary socialization that will lead your kids down the many roads he will go down to, but also his friends, his like other people in his life that have an influence on them. And if you have a town to raise your kid, basically a lot of people around you, it'd be a whole different story than just trying to do it by yourself.
Yeah, socializing the kid,
people.
kind of similar to how you need to make sure your dog can hang out with other dogs so they know how that all works. You can raise your child in the best possible way as a parent, but if the kids don't interact with other kids, then they're going to be awkward as an adult. So yeah, definitely you need a lot of other influences in the kid's life, because the kid also needs to learn how to deal with people. So they need to learn how to deal with their peers, people of their same age bracket. They need to learn how to deal with adults who are not you, who are not your parents. And then also just the different trials and tribulations that go with all of that. Goes a little bit into the debate of like public school versus private school, but I feel like for someone who's getting private schooling, you can still find extracurricular activities, sports and stuff for your kids to get that mental exercise. A lot of our social interactions are some of the most complex and important interactions that we have in life. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. You need the village. You need some larger social group.
Yeah, and you learn how to do social interactions by your parents having social interactions with others.
Mm-hmm.
And especially the time leading up to birth and right after, is for the woman it's really hard. For the man it's kind of whatever, depending on how involved you are.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like it's a time where you need outside help in order to get things done, and it's a lot of things you can do better or worse, but having the help and having people around you that care and will give you a hand when you need it go a really long way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd argue if you're a single parent, it's even a requirement. Otherwise, like, I couldn't imagine having the workload a single kid is, even for two people, to do this by yourself. It's wouldn't seem possible for me, but I guess there's plenty of people that prove the difference. But I don't think it's necessarily good for the parents or the kids' mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't to say that single parents are not good enough, it's just that it needs more people.
Yeah, someone is going to have to give the child attention, stimulation, something to think about and do and work with and so on. I was a relatively independent child, and I'm still kind of self-reliant in that sense. My parents gave me a really safe environment growing up, and I'm the kind of kid who is pretty content to like read books and just do stuff on my own for long periods of time. But lots of people require lots of social interaction, and I do as well. It's just interesting to see people's different social appetites of how much they want to be out and around others versus how introverted they might be.
Yeah.
I guess you can't really tell that for your current stage of your son's development.
I don't think he's antisocial, but I think he's like, there's this stage in development where they start to fear strangers. And this is usually when they become more mobile, because kind of like you want to be able to tell apart the in-group from the out-group. This happens pretty early on, apparently, which is interesting. But he doesn't show too much of a sign of this. Like, basically, if you're friendly with him, he'll like you eventually. He's skeptical at first, which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's definitely good. Don't get in the van. Be skeptical.
Yeah.
That's good.
Unless it's like really good candy. Then
yeah. Hey, get in the van. I have candy. How good is the candy? Oh, it's like normal candy. Okay, no. I'm not going.
Nah.
Well, nice. Appreciate you taking the time. And you still have, I think you said one of your dogs passed a while back?
Yes.
Do you still have one?
Yes.
Cool. And it's a Dalmatian?
Get another soon.
Yeah.
Soon-ish.
Once you feel like the son can take care of himself a little bit more.
Yeah. Or once we need another dog to take care of the son. Either of the two.
True.
Whichever comes first.
Would you get another Dalmatian or a different kind?
Most likely another Dalmatian.
Nice. What do you like about the breed? I haven't really met Dalmatians much.
They are very independent. Like, they really have a mind of their own, and they basically, in that sense, they're the same as the kid or as its parents, where it's like, if you want to get something done, they will get it done, whether or not you like it or not.
That makes sense. Strong-willed.
Also, they're very cute.
That's true. As many doggos are. Yeah, having kids is something that I haven't like hard committed to one way or the other. It's one thing that Trisha and I have talked about some. It's obviously like a very, very major life decision, so you don't want to just off the cuff make it randomly. You want to make sure that it's a good idea for you and for the coming child. So, yeah, very interesting topic. And then for our current generation, a lot of people are choosing to have kids less so than previous generations, where they're less focused on the core family. Like, I think that used to be a big part of people's identity, was having your wife and kids and so on, where it's less so that, and people are more focused on having experiences and that kind of thing. But having kids is its own experience. So we'll see.
Yeah, very much so. And it's very intense. It's very rewarding if you made the right decision in having kids, as in if you really thought it through and you have the support you need to get it done. It's really, really awesome.
I'm very glad that your child is healthy and doing well. I know that's a big point of anxiety for a lot of parents, especially during pregnancy, where you hope your kid is going to be okay. But now we're more concerned with the integrity of the coffee cups, so it means they're strong and able to destroy things.
It's like they soon realize the higher you drop something, the more likely it is to make a bunch of noise.
Nice.
So it's so interesting what they learn.
You have a young little physicist.
Yeah. More on all of that when we do this next time.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for coming on. We've broken our long hiatus from Philos'o'clock, so let me know whenever you have some openings. I've actually made a major life change myself, and I have a monthly planner, so we could even plan this out a little bit if we wanted to, which is nice.
Yeah, I'll reach out to you and we'll get this going on a at least semi-regular basis again.
Awesome.
Oh.
Proud of you for being a dad, and thanks for breaking down parenthood for us.
Thanks. Have a lovely stream.
Take care, and we will see you on the next episode of Philos'o'clock with EcceFatum.